All right, welcome everybody. Welcome to White Collar Support Group. This is our special Tuesday night speaker series, and tonight we have Erin Frey as our speaker. Very excited to have her, and I'll get around to introducing her in a moment. First, a little bit of housekeeping. This meeting is brought to you by our White Collar Support Group that meets on Monday nights. We've been meeting for over 9 years. We had our 450th meeting last month, so it's an amazing program that we have for those of you who have been prosecuted or in the process of being prosecuted for white collar crimes or regulatory matters. We have programs for family, for spouses. We have all kinds of online services that we provide. You can learn more about it on our website at prisonist.org. That's prisonist like feminist.org. And you can fill out the form there. We'll get back in touch with you through a meeting, and you can see what it's all about. We've had over 1,300 in the last 9 years, and we are super excited to have our speaker series now going on, I think, 4 years. We have a few speakers who who have or in the audience with us tonight, and we have Erin Frey. So I'm going to introduce Erin. Erin, I have something to read here. Erin Frey is an assistant professor at the Yale School of Management. Her research focuses on how workers recover after making major mistakes and how and when they are given second chances by organizations and society. She studied second chances in a range of industries, including the U.S. military, entrepreneurial training organizations, and in the entertainment industry. Her current research is focused on second chances for justice impacted individuals. Second chances in the entertainment industry. We got to hear about that one, Erin. I mean, we do know a few people in entertainment who need second chances. Erin received her BA from Harvard College and her PhD from Harvard Business School. She previously held faculty positions at the University of Virginia and the University of Southern California, where she taught courses on leadership, decision-making, and negotiations. You can reach her on her email at erin.l.frey, that's Frey .edu. And I will tell you that we've come to know Erin really well over the last. Uh, we're going to be announcing soon all the parameters of a research study that Erin is doing with our support group about its efficacy and outcomes relating to it. And when we first started talking to Erin about it, she basically admonished us. She said, be careful what you wish for, because she does unbiased peer research with peer-reviewed papers, and she's going to tell the truth. And since everyone in this group is dedicated to authenticity and telling the truth for the rest of our lives, we were happy to go along with it. So I'm going to introduce Erin. Erin, take it away for a half hour or so, and then afterwards we'll go to Q&A and sharing by members. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jeff. And it is such a pleasure to be here. So thank you for having me. So as Jeff said, I am Erin Frey, and I'm an assistant professor at the Yale School of Management. I am a research professor, which basically means that I do teach, but I actually spend most of my time doing research. So collecting data, analyzing data, writing papers, things like that. And my research expertise is in second chances. And by second chances, what I mean is the act of giving people an opportunity to try to succeed again after they have failed. And being at a business school, I tend to focus on second chances in careers and workplaces and in organizations. So my research, as we'll hear about, on second chances is really the reason that I got connected to Jeff in the White Collar Support Group in the first place. And at the end of today's session, I'll talk about some of the current research that I'm doing, specifically about second chances for people that have been incarcerated for white collar crime, and how they rebuild their lives after incarceration. But before I talk about sort of that new ongoing project, I'm going to just introduce you a little bit to how I got involved in studying second chances in the first place, and to also tell you a little bit about some of the previous research that I've done and what I found in terms of who gets second chances, how they're given, how people take advantage of them. And then I will talk a little bit about what we know about second chances in terms of when and how and why people get second chances after incarceration. Um, Spoiler alert, we actually know very little about this. And so I will summarize kind of what little we do know, but then I will talk about the research that I hope to be doing in the future to flesh out what we do know. So I have always been fascinated in really understanding why people do what they do, and in particular, people's behavior in companies and in workplaces. So when I went to Harvard Business School for my PhD, I started to meet a number of military officers there. And they told me that the military had been grappling with what to do about military trainees who had made major mistakes in their early careers. And historically, the military simply just kicked these people out, no questions asked. But since the early 2000s, there had been more and more talk about whether there was room for second chances, especially amongst kind of early career military officers. So I got really interested in this. And so for my PhD dissertation, I studied a relatively new program that the military had created that was designed to give people second chances after they committed some pretty major ethical mistakes early on in their careers. So instead of kicking out these military trainees, the trainees were allowed to remain in the military. They still faced very significant punishments and stigma. So they were demoted, they lost their rank, they were taken off their kind of normal jobs that they were doing. In fact, they had to wear a pin on their uniform that signaled to everybody else that they had violated a core military value. Um, but there was a road back through this program. And so if the trainees successfully completed the program, they would be reinstated. So they would get their rank back, they would be allowed to perform their jobs, they would continue on with their training, and they would have that pin removed. So this was a program that was designed to try to give these military trainees second chances after committing some pretty serious mistakes. And that was actually how I started studying the idea of second chances in businesses and organizations and workplaces in general. So I'll tell you just a little bit about what I found with that first study that I did with the military. And after kind of describing the findings, I'll pick out some insights that came out of that I think generalize to second chances in a lot of domains, including potentially after incarceration. So I think one of the interesting things that I didn't appreciate initially, but I found through the research, was that second chances, at least in the military, often got coupled with punishment. So yes, these trainees were going through a program. Yes, there was a road back for them. But alongside that, they were also demoted. They lost a lot of their privileges. They had to wear that pin that told everybody else that they had basically committed a pretty serious violation. Um, and that this was all forms of punishment. And in particular, that pin was pretty stigmatizing and embarrassing. A lot of the trainees that I talked to for the research called it the scarlet letter. They thought that wherever they went, people would see it and they would be judged because of it. So yes, they were grateful for the second chance, but it was not a pleasant experience because of sort of this punitive aspect that came with it. And so what did these trainees do? Well, as they continued through the program, they tried to hide that pin that they were wearing. They often tried to avoid talking about it. And they tried to sort of not engage with other people around the offense or around the situation. But they started to realize that they actually could not hide the pin. And even though they had really tried to avoid talking about what had happened to them, because of the pin, other people started asking direct questions about it. So this often happened where people would come up to them, normally sort of people that they knew, so their immediate supervising officer or some of their peers, but they would come up to them and ask these trainees, "Hey, what did you do? You know, why are you wearing that?" Um, and so this actually, what I found in the research was that because of this pin, it actually forced these trainees to start talking about what happened. And even though they didn't want to talk about it originally, they were actually pleasantly surprised about what talking about it did for them. So in particular, they found that it sort of did three different things. So first, they actually found that talking about the what they were accused of and the experience was actually quite therapeutic. They didn't expect it initially, but they found that sharing it with others simply made them feel a bit better. Um, the second thing that surprised them was that others tended to react much more positively than they expected when they did reveal, what they were accused of, or this big mistake that they made. So initially, they had anticipated that people would be extremely judgmental and they would ostracize them. But actually, when these trainees had the chance to tell their full story, others responded quite positively, and actually very encouragingly, and offered support. Um, and then the third thing that that talking about the what happened did was that it also forced the trainees to develop a narrative about what had happened and why. And my research showed that basically developing this narrative was really important because it forced the trainees to basically to share their narrative more widely. They actually became much more comfortable with what they had done. And so they were far more likely to start actually voluntarily talking about what the mistake that they had made, even without people asking them direct questions. And so the research that I did basically showed that this repeated telling of their narrative, and also refining it based on sort of how people reacted, not just to people that they were close to, but also to people that they didn't know as well, had three different effects on these trainees as they were sort of trying to rebuild their careers after these major mistakes. So first, repeatedly telling the narrative actually changed how these trainees felt about the mistake that they had made. So whereas before they were quite ashamed of it, they really tried to hide it, they became more comfortable accepting it and talking about it, and they were less defensive and less ashamed. The second thing that repeatedly talking about or sharing this narrative did was that it really made these trainees reflect on why they had made the mistake in the first place. And this led the trainees to feel like they were actually developing and growing in positive ways. And it made them feel like they could actually move forward. Um, and then interestingly, I think the kind of the most surprising thing that came out of this research was that the repeated telling of these narratives also seemed to make these trainees refrain from making the same mistake again in the future. So it helped them refrain from reoffending. And that might sound a little strange, but what I mean is this, that when the trainees were sharing this narrative, most of the time the narrative over time developed into a story of, I made a one-time mistake and I know I'll never do it again. Um, and most of the people that heard that narrative from these trainees took it as true. They really did see the trainee to have changed and grown, and they really did trust these people. Um, and so most people that heard the trainee tell their narrative on a sort of interpersonal level, they did give the trainee a second chance. They trusted them again. They sort of started interacting with with the trainee as though as though nothing had happened. And they really didn't hold the offense against them in any way. What happened over time was that as the trainees realized that they were telling more and more people this narrative, they also felt more and more pressure not to mess up again. They started to realize that so many people had heard them tell this narrative and so many people were trusting them with this second chance, that if they blew it, people would think that maybe they had been lying, that this was not a one-off thing that they did or a mistake that they did. And if they blew that second chance, they would never get a third chance. And so interestingly enough, a lot of the trainees that were in this research that I was doing ended up becoming sort of these moral exemplars at the military base that they were at. They were kind of the poster children for military values. And a lot of that was because they really felt like they had to live up to the narrative that they were sharing with many, many people. And so this was sort of the findings that came out of that first study in second chances that I had done. So you might be sitting there, thinking to yourself, okay, like, okay, that's fine, that's sort of interesting, but this is a study in the military. What can this possibly tell us about second chances in the real world or in the wider world, or sort of in your own personal lives? Um, so here are some things that I think that are important to take away, or that could be taken away from the study that I did, that actually are much more generalizable to second chances in lots of different domains. So I think one of the insights is, first, that second chances are never pain-free. That over the years and over the research projects that I've done, organizations tend to couple second chances with punishment or stigma or other negative consequences. It just sort of seems to be part of the human psychology that offenders still need to suffer in some capacity, even if there's also a desire to give them a second chance. Now, that might sound sort of dark and pessimistic, but I think there is sort of a positive side to this. And that's this, that my research showed that it was really those uncomfortable aspects of this process of second chances that were some of the seeds that were some of the seeds of growth and development. So remember that pin that I had been talking about? If it hadn't been for that pin, which was so shaming and uncomfortable, these trainees would have really never told anybody and never really talked about what happened. It was only because the pin was there that kind of forced them to start telling others about the mistake that they made. And so if they hadn't done that, then they wouldn't have had the therapeutic experiences of sharing their narrative. They wouldn't have gotten the surprising positive reactions and support that they got. And they wouldn't have been able to develop a narrative that they started feeling comfortable kind of sharing voluntarily and preemptively with other people, that really seemed to be part of the process of growth and development. And so maybe to summarize that, the uncomfortable aspects of second chances that do seem to accompany second chances might actually be part of the reason that people are able to take advantage of second chances and sort of grow and develop it from them. So that was sort of one of the first potentially more generalizable takeaways from the research. I think potentially a second point is that what I found in my research, and actually what has been shown in other domains, which I'll talk about in a couple of minutes, is that people tend to overestimate how negatively others will view them. So remember that one of the reasons why the trainees didn't want to share their story was because they thought that others would judge them and ostracize them, but they were surprised that actually others were so supportive and encouraging, and really reacted quite positively. So basically, one of the takeaways is that people tend to be far more supportive than I think we expect them to be ex ante. And that these narratives that we develop can also have a really humanizing impact and on others, including people that don't know us that well. Okay, so even though I do think that there's some generalizable takeaways from this research, I think it would be completely fair if you were sitting there thinking, look, okay, but these second chances were given to people who were members of an organization, and they remained part of the organization. They weren't actually kicked out. So it was actually really easy for the organization to give them a second chance and to design this whole program to kind of bring them back and reintegrate them. But what about people who have been convicted of a crime and have been incarcerated, right? There's no organization to come back to. So who's going to create a second chance program there? And so kind of the unanswered question is, what do second chances look like for those people that have been incarcerated and are coming back and trying to rebuild their lives? So if that's what you're thinking to yourself right now, I think that's an excellent question, because that is exactly the question that I've been thinking about since wrapping up this previous research project. And I am really trying to understand what second chances look like for people who have been incarcerated but are trying to rebuild and move forward and recover. So I actually started looking into this question of, what do we know about second chances for people that are sort of reentering from prison? And unfortunately, there is actually just very, very little research on this. We know very little. There's very little academic research on when and why and how businesses and organizations give second chances to people after they've been incarcerated. There's actually also very little research, academic research, on how formerly incarcerated people get and use second chances and how they try to rebuild their lives. And that's true of sort of people that have been formerly incarcerated in general. Research that is about second chances specifically for people that have been convicted and incarcerated for white-collar crimes specifically is essentially non-existent. So that is actually where my research is going now. I think this is a really important question that needs to be answered to understand second chances specifically for people that have been incarcerated for white-collar crime. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about the research that I am doing now. But before I do that, just to sort of show you kind of how little we know about this, I do want to spend a couple minutes just summarizing what the existing research says about second chances for people who have been incarcerated in general. There's so little of it that it actually doesn't take a lot of time to go through. So I hope you'll bear with me for the next couple of minutes. Okay, so what do we know about companies and organizations giving people second chances, especially in terms of employment after incarceration? Well, there is a little bit of work that's been done on the types of companies that tend to give second chances and tend to hire formerly incarcerated individuals. That work is probably largely what you would expect. There's not too much that's sort of groundbreaking about it. So we know that there's certain industries, for example, that are more willing to hire formerly incarcerated people. Those tend to be industries where that have sort of that are less service-based or less customer contact. So things like manufacturing, construction, transportation, and industries that are kind of more service oriented or focused are less likely to hire formerly incarcerated individuals. That's not to say that they never do. It's just that the likelihood or the prevalence is lower. What else do we know about companies that tend to give second chances? Interestingly enough, in terms of company size, sort of what size of the company does this, it's actually kind of a U-shaped relationship. So companies that tend to give second chances to formerly incarcerated individuals tend to either be very small, sort of less than 20 employees, or very, very large. Again, these are not hard and fast rules. These are just what the very limited research that's been done sort of say, but they do sketch out some of the parameters or some of the elements. So that's sort of what the research shows about kind of what types of organizations and companies give second chances. Another question that has been briefly looked at a little bit is, what do companies consider when they're considering whether they should hire someone that has been formerly incarcerated? Now, again, a lot of this research is probably kind of what you would expect. The research shows that companies and organizations tend to go through kind of a risk-reward trade-off when thinking about this. So they kind of weigh the perceived, might not be actual, but the perceived reputational and legal and financial risks that they might incur versus the benefits of hiring somebody with a criminal record or who has been incarcerated. So what are some of the benefits that they might look for? The research shows that things like tax incentives do occasionally play a role in making these decisions. Unfortunately, many companies don't know about that. That's another finding from the research. They don't know about tax incentives that they can get or other incentives that exist, but the ones that do sometimes factored into decision making. But I think more importantly, especially for this group, is that the value that the person potentially brings to the organization is also considered. So those people that have specialized skills or expertise are often sort of given more consideration. And there are other factors that employers consider. Again, none of these are really groundbreaking. There are things like, how long it's been since the incarceration or the offense, how the person, if there is an interview, how the person talks about what they were accused of in the interview, whether they take responsibility, they express gratitude, if they're defensive, etc. So that, again, it's nothing is sort of groundbreaking in terms of the research. And as you can see, that's pretty much the extent of the research in terms of when and how and why do organizations give second chances in terms of employment. On the other side is the question of how individuals either seek out or create or take advantage of second chances when they're given them, especially after incarceration. So, what do we know about individuals and second chances as they try to rebuild their lives? We know a little bit more here, but still certainly not enough. One of the takeaways that, or one of the things that I take away from this whole literature, is that second chances in this case they're really a process rather than an outcome. And what I mean by that is that after incarceration, finding a job is very difficult and can take a while. And I don't have to tell you that. Um, the good news is that people who have been incarcerated for white collar crimes in particular have much better chances. The research shows that they have much better chances at finding stable employment compared with other types of offenses. Doesn't mean that's 100%. It doesn't mean that it's easy, but the statistics show that that at least the likelihood is higher. What the research shows, though, is that often the first or the second or even kind of the third job, as people are reentering and reintegrating, are often in lower skilled industries. They tend to be more temporary positions. They tend to be lower wage positions, which is not ideal. That being said, though, even these first couple of jobs, and I'm talking all about averages now. So if your experiences doesn't map onto this, this is what the research shows about kind of the average experience, not about specific individuals' experiences. But what the research shows is that even though those first couple of jobs might not be ideal, often they result in pretty good relationships, especially with the bosses. And so they actually end up being relatively positive experiences. And I mean, perhaps on a more hopeful note, having a first or a second or third job, holding that and being quite successful and developing good relationships in that job actually makes it more likely for subsequent jobs in the future, ones that actually are more stable, higher wage, higher skilled. And a lot of the research shows that actually over time, eventually, especially those people that have been convicted of white collar offenses, do end up working in jobs and in careers that are middle class. So they are relatively high skilled, higher wage, even if their initial experiences right out of prison don't seem to map onto that. In the long run, they often trend toward kind of the higher skill positions. So I think there is some hope. Again, we don't have a lot of research on that, but there is some hope in terms of kind of second chances being a process rather than an outcome. I think another thing that I'll just say that the literature does show, or that the current research shows, is that we're realizing that it's also possible to create your own second chances, and that is often through entrepreneurship. So there's a lot of research now about this, about how individuals who have a really hard time finding employment, especially as they're reentering, often do or kind of find employment through entrepreneurial activities. So kind of small businesses, gig work, acting as independent consultants, things like that, which I think that many of you can probably relate to in some capacity. And that does seem to be a very positive way of kind of reestablishing, reentering, and reintegrating. And so, and I think if, especially for people that have been convicted and incarcerated for white collar crime, who tend to have, be highly educated, have a lot of skills, a lot of expertise, that in particular probably is an avenue that that can get a lot of traction. And I think the last thing that I'll say about what the existing research says about second chances and kind of how people rebuild their lives and seek out second chances after experiences of incarceration, is that, this is what I take away from it, is that people are actually far more likely to give second chances, perhaps more than organizations are, but people are actually quite forgiving and are quite willing to extend second chances. So the research shows that many people that are coming out of prison anticipate highly negative reactions from others, even from their friends and family and that kind of thing. But on average, what the data show is that incarcerated people tend to have much more positive treatment than they initially expect. And this is also what I found in my own research, right? That people anticipated being treated very negatively, but once they had a chance to share their narrative and talk to people about the mistake that they made, the reception that they received was much more supportive and positive than they expected. And that seems to be a sort of a quite robust finding across the board. And there is actually even some research that shows that in some cases, relationships can even be strengthened and actually get stronger after prison in some cases. And so I do think that kind of one of the hopeful aspects of studying second chances, especially for people that have been incarcerated for white collar crime, is that I think relationships are certainly one place where second chances tend to be sort of, maybe abundant is too strong a word, but that second chances starting in relationships is a place where they often begin, and then that can also be used for second chances in employment and things like that. Now, I want to reiterate that everything that I just shared with you, kind of all those insights about second chances and how businesses think about them, and also sort of what we know about people trying to navigate them, that again is based on research that's really been that's been done on incarcerated populations in general. It really is not specific to the experiences of people trying to rebuild their lives after white collar crime. And as I said, there is actually very, very little research that's been done specifically about second chances and rebuilding your life after incarceration for white collar crime. So this has actually become the focus of my work because there's so little that we know about it, and because I think a lot of the insights that we have about kind of general incarceration really might not apply, or things might apply very differently. And so I have now started a research project that really tries to understand second chances for those people that have been incarcerated after white collar crime. So I'm really interested in trying to understand sort of, what do people do to try to rebuild after being convicted and incarcerated for white collar crime. And in particular, I hope to find out sort of, what works and what doesn't. Across a range of outcomes, in terms of employment, of course, I'm at a business school, but also in terms of well-being, in terms of relationships, in terms of personal growth and community involvement. So as Jeff was alluding to earlier, I think one of the things that I find really interesting is what role do groups like the White Collar Support Group play in the process of rebuilding, in the process of seeking out and making use of second chances and finding second chances. So I'll just sort of briefly highlight the research that I'm doing, which all of you are warmly invited to participate in, and to tell you a little bit about kind of where I hope this is going. So for this research, I have started to interview people who have been or soon will be incarcerated for white collar crime. And I hope that by talking to a large number of people who are navigating the aftermath of conviction or incarceration, what I hope to find are patterns, sort of systematic patterns across people's stories that will help me identify the things that seem to work or not work in terms of rebuilding and recovering and making use of second chances. And so, as I think Jeff and the group will be publicizing a little bit later, all of you who are on this call or who are watching on YouTube are warmly encouraged to participate. So I would welcome any of you sort of participating in this research. What does that involve? Basically, it just means agreeing to sit down with me and participate in a confidential one-on-one interview where you just tell me your story. And then I, ask some questions about your experience and really learn from you. To tell you a little bit more, these interviews will last about 1 hour. I have been doing a lot of them on Zoom. I'm also open to meeting in person if you prefer, and if sort of travel budget and schedule allows. And one thing that I want to reiterate that I think we were talking about earlier in terms of the importance of confidentiality. I take confidentiality and privacy extremely seriously. And so this research has been reviewed by the Yale Ethics Board, and there are protections in place to make sure that your identity does not get linked back to the research. So everything that you tell me, your name will never be linked to it, and that we have protections to make sure that that what you share with me as part of the research remains confidential and private. I think. And I'm also just to sort of wrap up, I'm also interested in talking to people that are kind of at all stages of this process. So whether you've been out and it was 15 years ago that you were in prison, or if you haven't gone to prison yet, but you're about to go. I think there's a lot to learn from all stages of this process, and especially to learn what role a support group like this plays at all stages of this process. Um, and so with that, I think I'll pause there. I've been going maybe a little bit long, but I'm happy to answer questions either about the current research that I'm doing and what I hope to find, or about any of the prior research that I've done, or any of the research that I haven't done but is out there about second chances. So thank you very much.
Erin, that was absolutely fantastic. Thank you. And we are so grateful to have your attention and to be participating in this research project with you. I'll make a statement, then I'm gonna ask a question. The statement is that I've already been interviewed by Erin, and I can tell you that not only was it did she make it easy, but it was a cathartic experience for me. And I think that Erin was pretty clear that talking about our issues, there's something healing about it, and that was true for me. So I'm going to encourage anybody in the support group, anybody in the audience who's watching, to reach out to Erin, or if you want, reach out to me or reach out to Bill, and we'll make the connection for you. And again, I want to highlight that it's strictly confidential, and I had no issues whatsoever, either before, during, or after. So I highly encourage it. So I've been moderating private chats here, both in the chat, Erin, and on text. And most people have immediately made the connection between the military pin and Google search results. So what I don't want to do is like skew your research too much, but um, you know that our support group is involved in restoration of rights advocacy and um, advocating for these kind of this kind of change is really cultural. We plant the seeds now, and then they they uh, they get reaped, or they bloom somewhere in the future, and it can be beyond our lifespan. It could be 20 years from now. It's hard to tell when it actually will take hold. But as we're advocating, it's like we can advocate for policy change. We can advocate for, like, for example, we have a right to banking initiative. We have a pardon and expungement initiative. But that's different than what's out there on Google and wearing the pin that comes with that. And although, say, in Europe, where they have a right to be forgotten law, I don't know how effective that is. I don't have any personal experience with it. How much do you see that connection, even when you were forming this talk, and understand that that's the pin that we wear? And how focused are you on bringing that out so that we can understand it better, or in asking questions about it from people so that we can understand it better?
Definitely. So I think you sort of have hit on exactly sort of the path that I followed into this research topic. So I think you're absolutely right that Google search results, social media, it is the modern version of the pin, or it's the real world version of the pin. In fact, I was when I was initially thinking about and talking to people about the experiences of, having been convicted and incarcerated, the term that came up was digital scarlet letter, right? That's
Mhm.
often what it feels like to have your name out there, to never, and I think psychologically, um, even though it's not a physical pin on your uniform, I think psychologically it operates very similarly. Without putting too many, without trying to put words in anyone's mouth here, kind of the interviews that I already have done, what people have told me is that you're always afraid that about whether people know. And I think that that's similar to sort of with the pin. You're always wondering, did somebody pay attention? Did somebody notice? Right? You never know if somebody knows or if somebody doesn't know. And if they know, why are they not saying anything? Right? There's so much anxiety, and that accompanies it and accompanies the uncertainty and the not knowing. And often when things go wrong, the trainee said this too, and I think the people that I've talked to, who are reentering after incarceration, have said this too. They said, when something goes wrong, when I don't get a call back from an employer, or when somebody sort of treats me negatively, is it because of the pin, or because they read something about me online, or is it just that there was something wrong with me, or was it because they had a bad day? And I think that is really, it's just psychologically exhausting and draining to not know. So I think the parallels are massive. I think it is exactly parallel. I think the difference is that, in a way, the military trainees had it easier. That's just my assessment, because they were constantly surrounded by the same group of people. And they had people that were there face to face who could eventually, when they worked up the courage, say, like, hey, why are you wearing that? What did you do to get that? Whereas in our day-to-day lives, with these digital scarlet letters, with the names being plastered all over Google and social media, the opportunities for that are actually far less. And so I think there are fewer triggers for these moments of discomfort and being forced to talk about it, but that might actually have these long-term kind of therapeutic and beneficial things. So yes, it's something that I've thought a lot about. That being said, in terms of the research, it's something that I would love to hear people's experiences of. I think there's a lot that I still don't know about, and certainly a lot that I can learn from all of your experiences and from lots of people that I talk to. So it's something that I would love to discuss.
Thank you, Erin. We have a queue that is forming. We're going to go first to Elizabeth and then Ian.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful, wonderful presentation, Erin. Thank you. I have a quick question, an offer, and then a rather amorphous comment. Um,
Fantastic.
the question is, I was a bit unclear about the scope of your research. Is it only going to deal with people who were actually incarcerated, or is it going to extend to people who were convicted but who were given some sort of non-custodial sentence?
Great clarification question. So I'm interested in talking to anybody who has either pleaded or been convicted, regardless of whether they have been to prison yet, regardless of whether they're ever going to prison, or whether they've been to prison years ago and are out now. So pretty much the only requirement is really that they've either pleaded or been convicted. I think that there's probably a lot of differences depending on what exactly the sentence is that happens. And so hopefully that's something that the research will bring out. But for now, I'm interested in talking to people that have a range of experiences on that.
Great. And the offer to you is I'm on the editorial board of ABA Criminal Justice Magazine, and I was thinking a short article by you about the results of your finding among the military, and then a description of your current research, followed by a request for all interested attorneys to connect with former clients. Might be educational for the readership as well as helpful for you.
That's a very generous offer. I really
I'm
appreciate.
not promising anything,
No, no, but I
but
mean it's a wonderful idea, and I would love to chat with you further offline
okay,
about all
great.
of that. I think that sounds fantastic.
Great. I'll get you my contact info. And then finally, the amorphous comment. As you were sharing your results, I thought this is wonderful. This is exactly what Jeff's group does. It underscores the power and the magic of his program. And wonderful that the people who spoke to you are very committed not to reoffend. Clearly, that purpose of deterrence that the criminal justice system is supposed to inculcate is working. Clearly, the principle of rehabilitation is working. But then, to the degree that the shame and the stigma are not present to the degree people initially envisioned, the principle of punishment maybe isn't being achieved, in which the authors of these draconian penalties envisioned. Now, that can cut both ways. The simple retort could be, well, if the stigma is not there, clearly we need to make the punishment more rigid. But it's difficult to fathom how. And this could be used for a further argument that there are other dispositions, there are other diversionary options that might be just as effective, if not more so. And I go back to an ABA resolution that was passed at the mid-year meeting that made it easier for attorneys with a prior conviction to be reinstated. And the segment of the ABA which most readily embraced that resolution and did not offer amendments or other qualifications was the Young Lawyers Division, which I think is a very, very interesting signal about what I hope is a future trend of tolerance in our society.
So I think there's a lot there to unpack, and I would love to connect offline
Yeah.
and chat about it. I think just maybe commenting on a couple of the points that you raised, this idea of, are there other diversionary options? I think everything that, like all of the research that I've done, and I
Or
think
deferred prosecution, certainly in the case of white collar offenders.
right. And I do think that from a psychological perspective, like I kind of go back to my roots as sort of from a psychological perspective, I'm not convinced that it is the stigma that fundamentally changes people and improves them in the way that the criminal justice system wants to improve them. I think that potentially there are other mechanisms there. And so this, as you say, there might be a case for other types of responses. I'll just sort of use a broader term there. And so I think I hope that it's a conversation that it sounds like it's certainly gotten opened up. And I think I hope that the research that I'm doing now will also shed some light on that. What are the mechanisms by which the changes that, yes, the criminal justice system, but also sort of we as humans, hope that we can help people, move forward with their lives and repair. Like, what are the mechanisms there? And do we have to rely on kind of the traditional ways of doing it, or are there other avenues that we can explore? So I'd love to chat about that further.
Okay. Okay.
Elizabeth, thank you so much. And before we get to Ian, I'm going to do a shameless plug. Here's the current issue of the ABA Criminal Justice Magazine, and they published an article that I wrote a couple of years ago. And believe me, if they'll publish my article, Erin, they'll publish yours. There's no question in my mind. All right, let's get to Ian and then Perry.
Thanks, Jeff. Hey, everybody, Ian here. I'm trying to get a timer here to work. Maybe Jeff, just let me know when I should wrap it up here. I don't want to go too long.
3 minutes.
Okay. more comments and questions. Um, my what I did wasn't really white collar in nature, like typical. It was more like, I mean, you could look at it, it was selling drugs on a college campus. And my incarceration wasn't when I had time to establish a career. So I got finished that a small jail stint, and then I had like a suspended sentence and went through the probationary period and all that stuff. But after that, I had a felony record, and there were significant barriers to employment, and in some careers, some pathways were just finished. And I was very young at the time, so I was like, in my 20s, and luckily this was like 25 years ago. So um, I I started attending AA meetings, and I, lived a life of sobriety, and, tried to be rigorously honest in everything I do, and, all my interactions. But at the same time, the stigma was there. Like I never talked about this stuff, even with people in recovery. Um, Never, there's people today. I opened up to a friend about a year ago and told him everything, a childhood friend, and he's like a helicopter pilot, like he's like airline pilot, helicopter pilot, and I mean, I'm only saying that because we were sort of doing the same kind of stuff, and he just didn't. That stuff didn't happen to him, but it happened to me, and the it felt so relieving to like even talk about that, because like at my 10-year high school reunion, people had known about what I had done, and they asked me to come like talk about it, and I was just like horrified. And like looking back now, I went to my 30-year high school reunion. Like I would have kind of not gladly, but I would have shared about it. And like at that moment when I was like 2 or 3 years removed from probation, like it was just a horrific type of realization to talk about it. And the types of jobs I've taken are like you said, they're not high paying jobs. They're barely middle class jobs and stuff like that. And I moved to Europe partly because I didn't have to carry that baggage with me here.
Mm.
Um, and I had to rebuild basically my whole like career from scratch when I moved here. And I wish there'd been more like coaching, I suppose. Like this is what you should do. These are the fields you can focus on. These are the types of things that have less of a barrier to entry. Um, so my advocacy, so and then like also the advocacy part, so I'm really interested. For a long time, I was concerned about that. I was like concerned about getting a pardon and trying hard to do that. I'm a little bit more apathetic about that now. And I always felt like that I was given a bad deal and stuff like that. But it's like um and also just the shame and not being public about it, or public, whatever you want to call it. But I'm opening up to the possibility of um, sharing my experience and other things that I've learned mostly from going through like recovery meetings and stuff like that. So I've shared enough. I will stop it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. Wonderful. Next is Perry, and then if I have it right, then Bill.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, I'm Perry, and Erin, yeah, really enjoyed the path that you're on to do this kind of work. And it just reminded me, and I just did a quick Google, there's a group you might want to connect to. It's called the Recovery Research Institute. Dr. John Kelly oversees that, and that's out of Harvard Medical School and Massachusetts General Hospital. And he's been at this kind of work for 10 years. And I think there could be some positive synergy there, because I was messaging Jeff that I hope that within your research, you will also take a closer look at, and it's already been mentioned by Ian, those who are getting their mental health and addiction issues taken care of. Um, Ironically, this Thursday, the 20th, I physically walked out of prison, and that was 46 years ago. So I have a 46-year point of view. Um, and it's been interesting. I'm mainly been in the DC, Maryland, Delaware area where I'm currently at. And that is the common denominator. And I've been involved, I was a therapist and I've worked in advocacy groups, still part of one in Maryland. And if you don't treat that, you're not going to have a successful second chance or third chance or fourth chance or what have you. So I just thought I'd just, if nothing else, put it on your radar. Also, I've heard this statement as a formerly incarcerated person, you're still punished for being punished. That just meets the experience. The other thing, though, is I've learned it's hard to hate up close. And so when people can humanize us as formerly incarcerated and have some communication skills, but even beyond that, a sense of self that just because you make mistakes doesn't make you a mistake. And so those are just key sort of elements that I just thought I'd raise to you. And the last thing too, I'll also echo, and I've seen this, and Department of Labor, gosh, a dozen years ago did a thing on formerly incarcerated self-employment and how successful that track can be. It's sort of like legalizing your street skills was one way it was presented. So yeah, I thought to put that out there. So thanks for what you're doing.
Well, thank you, and thank you for the suggestion for the Recovery Research Institute. I'm not aware of it, but I will definitely check it out. And I also really appreciate you flagging sort of mental health, which is, of course, a really important part and probably part of many, many people's stories. And so I really appreciate you underscoring that is an important thing to pay attention to and discuss as well.
Thank you, Perry. Next up is Bill and then Michael.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. Erin, great, just really wonderful presentation. And two things jumped out at me. I think, or in my own experience, I think part of the acceptance or the negative reaction, I think, comes from when somebody reads about the conviction. So I'm going to be really interested to hear about, conviction with prison time versus no prison time, because my personal experience is that when people find out you've been incarcerated, they intuitively know it's not fun. It's not easy. So it's like that, because maybe they know somebody, but it's when they read about it or they read about the press release, that creates an image in their mind of the person. But as I think Perry just said, it's hard to hate somebody up close when you see they're a human being. The other thing that why I'm so thrilled about all this too is that we are hoping, and one of the things we've always tried to focus on is that we would love to see, and this goes to your point, hopefully, potentially, or Elizabeth, excuse me, is that this could be a diversionary option for somebody. Because, the more you talk about it, the more you make commitments. You're going to make commitments publicly you're going to make them to yourself. You're going to make them to other people. And so hopefully that develops into something, substantial that could influence judges, prosecutors, defense attorneys, et cetera. So I just say thank you. And I really loved your presentation tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Now up next is Michael, and we could use a couple more names.
Thank you, Erin, for your presentation. I really appreciate you coming out and talking to us. You talked about people coming home with white collar convictions. And I think a lot of the people in this group can identify with that. Um, the nonprofit I work for, we work with people that are on probation and parole. But when I get that white collar person, it's, because the jobs that we have are typically, I would say, mostly manual labor jobs, warehouse. Now, we do here in Memphis have a program through Shelby County government where they'll give second chances. So it's possible to get an office job because a couple of our guys did get those. But when you talk about white collar folks, it's different because again with the all the factors, the press release, as soon as you apply for something, they're gonna go look it up, and again, it's gonna be you're the worst person walking the planet. So it's a really really tough haul. So I think, and I'm glad that there's someone out there that's doing that because a lot of employers signed the pledge when Barack Obama was in office that they'll give second chances. When you take away the cameras, they aren't doing it. So it's tough enough for them, and it's even tougher, when you have a white collar offense because people say, "Well, I don't want to do that work." When people are ready to come back home and get to work, they just want to work. They just want an opportunity. You do have some that say, I can't, that's beneath me or what have you. They don't say that long, if they can't find a job. So it's nice to know that, there's somebody looking at it from that aspect also because different aspects, different views of it affect people differently. Everybody didn't go to prison for the exact same thing. Everybody didn't have the same skill set. So thank you for doing that work and we appreciate you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Is there anyone else like to ask Erin a question or share your experience? Erin, I want to underscore something that Bill just said. It is definitely one of the long-term goals of this group to be regarded by the judicial system as a bona fide diversionary option. And I could foresee a day when for certain relatively low-level white-collar crimes where a judge might say, as in other diversionary programs and other diversion programs, go spend 6 months at the white collar support group and be enrolled in their program. I want to see results. I want to see tracking. Come back to me, and then we'll sentence you after you've gone through the program. That's done all the time in drug treatment programs, and I don't see why a so-called ethics rehab would be any different if it's handled the right way. So what do you think about that in terms of a possibility or trying to read tea leaves as to what might be in the art of the possible?
So I think from a efficacy standpoint, everything that I know about psychology, everything that I've learned from my own research and from the research that is out there, we know that, I use the term ethics rehab, we know that people make mistakes, and we know that people learn and grow ethically and morally from those mistakes. We know that redemption in terms of sort of, internal development is possible. And we know that people do that, especially after making really serious mistakes that they feel very guilty about. I have not seen any compelling evidence myself that prison is what does that to people or that triggers that process. I'm not saying that it doesn't, but I think that's why this research is really important. It's to figure out what is that process? When does it happen? Does it have to happen in prison? Can it happen in other ways? And if it happens in other ways, if that is part of the goal of the criminal justice system, then maybe we should be thinking about other types of diversionary, approaches. From a completely sort of pragmatic perspective, I wish we could convince a judge somewhere to actually run what's called a randomized controlled trial and actually try this. That's the gold standard in research. It's the idea that you actually take people and then you randomize them into either going to prison or attending the white collar support group or to doing something else. And then you actually collect data on the back end in terms of not just reoffending, but also kind of maybe mental health, also sort of how they think about ethical situations, sort of how do they respond in challenging situations, and you see if there are differences across that. That's the gold standard. And if there's a judge out there, if anybody knows that a judge that is sort of open-minded and willing to try something new, I think that would certainly be the way to show, beyond the shadow of a doubt, that the white collar support group or other diversionary approaches could potentially be just as effective or maybe even more effective at getting certain outcomes that we think are important than prison. So convincing a judge to do that, I'm not sure if that's likely. I would hope so, but until then, I think the research that I'm doing will at least
It would be reversed on appeal.
Yeah. But until then, the research that I'm
Yeah.
doing more qualitative will provide some, hopefully, evidence or information that can shed light on potentially, or provide some evidence, even if it's not kind of the gold standard evidence.
But this is our public service announcement by Erin Frey for a judge out there to take a shot on us. And Bill, is there something you want to add?
Yes, Erin, would you like me to drop in the chat if someone wants to inquire and to follow up? Is that okay?
Yes, absolutely. I actually have a
Good.
link. So if anybody
Yes, I saw it in the email, and I was going to drop it for you since you're busy fielding questions. I wanted to make sure it was okay.
Yes,
there it is. And Erin, what is in the research that you have seen? What is, in your kind of estimate or what your research shows, the most forgiving industry business group that you have found for second chances, or is there one? Because I think there's probably all different kinds of stigma within different groups.
So, and this is not my research, but the
Right.
research tends to show is that industries that have sort of less customer contact tends to be the industries that are more willing to hire people with criminal records or who have been incarcerated. I also, from kind of my own work that I've done on this, I also think that within an industry, it's often the jobs that are less customer facing that also are the ones that are more likely to be open to people with criminal records. So it's sort of back office or, as Michael was saying, sort of, more kind of manual labor or stocking jobs, warehouse jobs, things like that. That is probably, from a numbers perspective, like an absolute numbers perspective, that's probably the most common employer. But in terms of sort of percentage wise, I will definitely look into that a little bit more and get back to you and see if I can find any good numbers on it. As Michael was saying, there's lots of different companies from lots of different industries that have made statements saying that they are interested in fair chance hiring and second chance hiring. But I think the follow through is not as good as sort of what they initially aspired to.
Very true. Thank you again, Erin.
Well, Bill, thank you. And thank you, everybody, for your questions. And thank you, Erin, for just an incredible evening. The link that Bill put in the chat will be in the show notes on YouTube. So if you're interested in participating in the research project, you can click the link that will be in the show notes, or you can reach Erin at her email. And Erin, why don't you give it so I don't have to scroll all the way back?
Sure. It's Erin, ERIN.L.FREY at Yale.edu. And actually, I can just type it into.
And we'll put that in the show notes as well. Erin, this has just been a really wonderful evening, and we are grateful again for just all the attention and to be able to have the honor and the privilege of working with you on this project. So let's see. Next month on April 8th, we have Lewis Reed as our guest speaker, and he is a criminal justice advocate and well known on the national criminal justice stage. And he'll be here talking about some of the projects that he has worked on, including getting the First Step Act passed, and what he's doing right now and his vision for the future. Again, you can reach us on our website, prisonist.org. That's prisonist like feminist.org. And a lot of information there. And also, you'll find the form to fill out to join our support group. So, Erin Frey, thank you so much for being our guest speaker tonight. Blessings to everyone. Have a wonderful week. And hopefully, we'll see you all on Monday night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night, everybody.